Canada has been very tough to deal with over the years. We don't need them to make our cars, and they make a lot of them. We don't need their lumber because we have our own forests, et cetera, et cetera. We don't need their oil and gas. We have more than anybody.
I'm being honest, like no one knows what he wants, including elected officials down here.
In early August, Donald Trump escalated his tariff campaign. Canada was locked into a 35% duty for non-USMCA goods, while the EU, Japan, and South Korea accepted lower tariff caps in exchange for concessions. Switzerland was hit with 39% after talks failed, and Mexico secured a 90-day delay. But this isn't just about one country. Ottawa is under sustained pressure, and Beijing is advancing strategies that undercut U.S. leverage. Trump's tariffs have opened multiple fronts, and both Canada and China are responding in ways designed to outlast short-term shocks.
For a long time, Canada was happy to send its oil to the U.S.
Nearly all of Canada's oil is exported to its neighbor.
It seems not very exposed because it's the one thing the U.S. hasn't really put any tariffs on so far. I think they recognize they need our oil and gas to provide energy security for their country.
Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, Canada has refused to rush into a bad deal. Instead, it is reinforcing links with Mexico, diversifying export destinations, and protecting domestic industries from sudden disruption. One of its strongest cards is energy. The United States depends on millions of barrels of Canadian oil and gas each day for energy security. Imposing tariffs on that flow would raise U.S. consumer prices, a cost Washington is unlikely to risk. This interdependence allows Canada to absorb tariff pressure while building alternative markets, rather than bending to Washington's timeline.
The impression we get, certainly, is that Trump's leverage with China is much less.
Well, China is reportedly tightening its grip on critical minerals it supplies to Western defense companies. According to a Wall Street Journal report, Beijing's control over rare earths is delaying production and driving up the cost of key materials used to make weapons, jets, and drones.
Beijing's pushback is targeting the very supply chains that U.S. tariffs cannot reach. On the industrial side, China controls roughly 60 to 70% of global rare earth mining and close to 90% of refining. Since late 2024, it has tightened export rules for minerals essential to defense manufacturing, from high-temperature magnets for jet engines to specialty alloys, making these materials harder and more expensive for U.S. contractors to source.
China has pulled off something of a magic trick when it comes to oil independence. It's estimated more than a fifth of China's oil imports last year was sanctioned oil.
On the energy front, China has been dismantling one of its biggest vulnerabilities: reliance on seaborne oil imports that pass through the U.S.-monitored Malacca Strait. By expanding renewable power generation, building the world's largest electric vehicle industry, and adding to its strategic oil reserves, Beijing is reducing the leverage that U.S. naval power once held. It has also turned sanctioned oil into a tool of resilience. In 2024, China brought in about 821,000 barrels per day from Russia, 1.4 million from Iran, and roughly 268,000 from Venezuela, all under U.S. sanctions. Much of this crude is processed by smaller teapot refineries, which then sell refined products across Asia. This approach keeps feedstock costs low, supports domestic refining capacity, and weakens the intended bite of U.S. sanctions. Together, these moves give China more room to maneuver in a trade confrontation, restricting what America needs while securing what China itself cannot afford to lose. Trump's intent is clear: make resisting U.S. terms more expensive than conceding. Yet both Canada and China are using asymmetric responses. Canada leans on its role as a critical energy supplier. China makes essential inputs scarcer and cuts its exposure to American pressure points. Neither is matching tariff for tariff. Both are targeting U.S. vulnerabilities that tariffs cannot fix. The result? Rising costs inside the United States, from defense materials to industrial components, with no quick resolution in sight. Trump is chasing rapid, visible wins, agreements he can showcase as proof of American strength. Carney's approach is defensive patience. Maintain negotiating channels, protect Canada's structural advantages, and avoid locking in concessions that could collapse within months. Xi Jinping's strategy is slower still, reshaping industries and supply chains to make the next trade conflict less damaging for China. This contest is no longer about headline tariff rates. It is about which side can endure and adapt under pressure. Canada's energy leverage and trade diversification, China's control over critical minerals and its energy transition, are all designed to make U.S. economic coercion costlier over time. Trump's tariffs have reshaped the tone of global trade, but they have also triggered a coordinated pushback that will test America's ability to fight on multiple fronts without giving ground.
Certainly sounds like Canada-U.S. trade talks are in a holding pattern. That is after President Donald Trump raised tariffs on certain Canadian goods. Some of the country's premiers are calling for retaliation.
Taking the American alcohol off the shelves, looking at the procurement process, we have to, push back for sure.
At midnight on August 1st, President Trump raised tariffs on Canadian goods not covered by USMCA from 25% to 35%. It was a dramatic move aimed at punishing Canada for refusing to sign a last-minute trade deal. Unlike South Korea or the EU, Canada stood its ground, insisting on a fair agreement instead of rushing under pressure. The tariff hit a small share of total exports but carried symbolic weight, signaling that even a close ally could be targeted. It marked a shift from cooperation to confrontation, straining a trade relationship long seen as one of the most stable in the world.
Canada is strong. We can give ourselves far more than anyone can take away. Building sustainably, building together, building positively, and that's what we're going to do. And yes, we'll come to something with the Americans.
But Canada didn't respond with noise. There were no podium outbursts, no rushed retaliatory tariffs. What followed was calm, measured, and quietly firm. Ordinary Canadians voiced frustration but not fear. They've seen this before. During Trump's first term, retaliatory bans on U.S. products, like removing American whiskey from shelves, caused real political ripples south of the border. That memory remains. Today, many Canadians favor long-term resilience over tit-for-tat escalation. The broader public mood in Canada has shifted. People are exhausted by cycles of unpredictability and power plays. Trump's approach is seen not as diplomacy but as theater. And Canada this time is choosing not to be part of the show. Prime Minister Mark Carney did not sign a last-minute deal like South Korea or the European Union. He made clear that Canada wouldn't accept a template agreement that didn't serve national interests. In public remarks, Carney emphasized sustainability and national self-confidence. He acknowledged the complexity of negotiations, but did not waver. His strategy is deliberate: avoid a bad deal, wait out the noise, and protect long-term national leverage. Trump expected submission. What he got was defiance, delivered without spectacle.
And when you blow up a relationship as important to that process as the U.S.-Canada relationship, there are consequences.
In fact, a few days ago, it was reported that Canada and Mexico are working on a, quote, Northern Corridor agreement and to create easier trade between Mexico and Canada without involving the United States.
Economists quickly noted most of Canada's exports to the U.S., about 95%, remain protected under the USMCA. Only a small share is affected by the new tariff. But that small share carries symbolic weight, especially in provinces like Ontario, where politically sensitive sectors like steel and automotive are centered. Former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, David Cohen, publicly warned that these moves are eroding trust. For decades, the U.S.-Canada relationship stood out globally for its stability. Defense, intelligence, and cultural ties went hand in hand with trade. But that trust, painstakingly rebuilt during the Biden administration, has now taken another hit. And behind the scenes, Canada and Mexico are accelerating plans for a $120 billion Northern Corridor trade route, bypassing the U.S. entirely. It's a quiet signal that some allies are preparing for a future with less American reliability. Trump's team pointed to a 3% GDP increase in Q2 as proof of strength. But economists, including those cited by Commerce Department briefings, explained the rise was mostly a technical bounce, driven by a sharp drop in imports after businesses rushed to stockpile ahead of tariff deadlines. In April, Trump had claimed to have made 200 trade deals. By August 1st, the actual number was closer to 8. Canada, notably, wasn't one of them. Trump's strategy is to appear strong, but with every tariff that alienates a key partner, the U.S. risks standing more alone, isolated from the very allies it once relied on. Canada isn't just holding firm, it's quietly walking away from the pressure and keeping its options open.
Although Canada is facing the same deadline that the EU and Japan were facing, and all these other countries are facing, Canada is actually not facing the same level of impact. In fact, the impact is substantially lower.
As the clock ticks toward the August 1st trade deadline, most of the world has already made its choices. Under pressure from the White House, the European Union and Japan both signed rapid trade agreements with the United States, deals designed more to dodge punishment than to secure long-term benefit. But Canada hasn't followed that path. Instead of rushing to cut a deal, Ottawa has held its ground. There's no shouting match, no walkouts, no celebratory handshake, just a calm, calculated decision to say, not now. And that's exactly what's frustrating Donald Trump the most.
Even if Trump goes ahead and he imposes that 35% on Friday, you got plenty of observers out there saying that this CUSMA exemption is giving Canada a big competitive advantage.
Unlike Europe and Japan, Canada doesn't face blanket tariffs on nearly all of its exports. Thanks to the Canada-US-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA for short, nearly 90% of Canadian exports to the US already qualify for tariff exemptions. That's according to an analysis from RBC Economics based on compliance with rules of origin requirements. So when Trump imposed a 25% border security tariff earlier this year, threatening to raise it to 35% by August 1st, it wasn't the knockout blow some had expected. As long as the White House keeps CUSMA exemptions in place, Canada retains a built-in buffer that Europe and Japan simply don't have. This structural advantage allows Prime Minister Mark Carney to reject a rushed or one-sided deal. His message is clear, even if unspoken. Canada isn't afraid of no deal, and it won't accept a bad one just to make the headlines disappear. What makes this different from past disputes is the quiet coordination inside Canada's cabinet. Behind closed doors, officials are reviewing contingency scenarios, not only for industry protections, but also diplomatic and legal countermeasures if Trump decides to escalate. This preparation has become a key part of Ottawa's confidence. For President Trump, that approach throws off the entire playbook. In recent months, he's relied on a combination of deadlines and economic pain to pressure countries into agreement. The EU, under threat of 30% tariffs, settled for a 15% across-the-board rate, one many European commentators have described as more symbolic than strategic. Japan followed quickly after, also under pressure. But Canada's resistance is something different. Ottawa hasn't staged a confrontation. It hasn't even refused to talk. It has simply declined to be hurried. This quiet defiance complicates Trump's narrative of victory. The U.S. administration continues to honor the CUSMA carve-outs, for now, but that also means Trump's threats lose much of their edge. And when the usual pressure doesn't work, frustration rises. Observers in both countries have noted the shift. Canada, by preparing for no deal in advance, has turned Trump's deadline into just another date on the calendar, not a crisis point. What's striking is the tone. Mark Carney hasn't escalated. He hasn't matched Trump's aggressive rhetoric. He's done something more unsettling. He stayed silent. That silence, paired with quiet preparation, has created an uncomfortable contrast. While Trump increases the volume, Canada lowers its voice and gains more control. Some political analysts suggest that Carney's strategy may even force the U.S. president to make the next move himself. Whether that's a concession, an extension, or another round of tariffs remains to be seen. But the fact that this uncertainty now cuts both ways is a shift in itself. As the deadline arrives, one thing is clear: Canada is rewriting the rules of engagement. It's no longer about panic or posturing, it's about patience, the kind of patience that only comes when you've prepared for the worst and realized it's not as bad as giving in. Trump may still impose more tariffs, or he may seek a last-minute breakthrough, but for the first time in a long time, he's facing a counterpart who isn't bluffing and who isn't afraid of walking away. And that changes everything.